Some of the hardest problems in the world exist far above the planet. Our job? To launch the smartest solutions, to protect our satellites, clean up our clutter, to propel breakthroughs in propulsion, to learn more about our place in the universe, to outpace emerging threats. Every day, the Aerospace Corporation uses the latest technologies to ensure our nation's safety and leadership in space.
Hi, welcome to the Space Policy Show. My co-host Corbin Dallas here. We have the human side of space with Kara Cunzeman, Angie Bukley, and Kris Lehnhardt. A little bit about Kara. She is our lead futurist at the Center for Space Policy and Strategy at Aerospace Corporation. Before I kick it over to her, I just want to remind everybody, if you have questions, you can go to Twitter and you can type in hashtag the Space Policy Show, or you can ask your questions in the comment box on Vimeo, whatever you prefer. Kara, over to you to introduce our other guests.
Thanks, Rebecca. As she mentioned, I'm Kara. I'm our lead futurist here within the Center for Space Policy and Strategy, leading our Strategic Foresight Initiative. And as part of today's show, we're really going to be talking about one of what I think is space's hardest problems, which is humans exploring space. We've really, evolved to kind of be nurtured here on Earth, both in body and mind. And there's some real challenges with having a sustained presence in space. And so I'm delighted to have our two guests here today to talk through some of these problems and start thinking about how we can pave a path forward to getting humans sustained in space faster than maybe the current trajectory we're on. So I'd like to start off by reading our two guest bios, and then we'll get into some questions with our fireside chat. First up is Dr. Kris Lehnhardt. He is the Element Scientist for Exploration Medical Capability in the NASA Human Research Program at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. Dr. Lehnhardt is a board-certified emergency physician with expertise in extreme environmental medicine, which includes elements of aerospace medicine, diving medicine, and wilderness medicine. Dr. Lehnhardt has a senior faculty appointment in the Department of Emergency Medicine and the Center for Space Medicine at Baylor College of Medicine, where he works clinically in the Bed Tub Hospital Emergency Department. And also, he is a medical specialist reservist in the Royal Canadian Air Force, a private pilot, an advanced open water scuba diver. Welcome, Kris.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Also, we have our very own rocket scientist, Dr. Angie Bukley. She is the head of the Exploration Science and Technology Organization in the Human Exploration and Spaceflight Division of the Civil Systems Group at Aerospace Corporation and based in Houston, Texas. She provides leadership across the ES&T portfolio, which ranges from biosciences to STEM to astrophysics, mission analysis to nuclear thermal propulsion development. With over 35 years of professional experience, Dr. Bukley's career has spanned a broad range of defense and space systems research, analysis, design, and technical management, and has been heavily involved in a variety of civil space programs. A fun fact is she was also a member of the 1995 U.S. National Mountain Bike team, and she finished in the top 10 in her division at the World Championships in Kursgarten, Germany that year. Welcome, Angie. So this is really an A-team set of resumes here. And I probably should also note that both of you are international space studies graduates and faculty. And it's clear that you have a bit of maverick in both of you. We have, a pilot, a scuba instructor, and a mountain bike world champion. How incredible. On top of all the immense, capabilities you bring to the table in your day jobs. So I would like to start the conversation off with an interesting question. I have to ask, why aren't we here yet? Why is space so hard on humans? Kris, if you could start this one, and then we can punt it over to Angie.
I think you brought up a really good point before, where you were describing how we are really suited to living well on Earth, and space really taxes our ability to take advantage of the environment. And so the challenge that we have with spaceflight is that everything in space is trying to kill us constantly. And the challenge of living and working in space and being productive in space is difficult because every single task is substantially harder in space than it is on the ground. And so I think one of the key reasons why we may not be as far along as we would like to be in terms of human spaceflight is simply that we have underestimated the challenge of the human side of space, in that we've figured out how to develop great rocket systems, and we've figured out how to develop environmental control and life support systems. But then you get to trouble like, how do I make sure the astronauts have an adequate diet? And it's the squishy meat sack human side of things that is constantly more challenging than we think it should be. And we collectively have probably not invested the time and effort in the human side of space exploration to really advance our goals to where we want to be.
Wow, that's fascinating. Angie, from your perspective, why is space so hard on humans?
Well, for the same reasons that Kris said, but in addition to being hard on humans when they get to space, it's hard on humans just to get them to space. If you think about the loads that the human body has to sustain just during the launch process, it's pretty harsh. You maintain up to 4 Gs, or you feel up to 4 Gs in your chest on the Soyuz vehicle. I think the loading on the shuttle was 3 Gs. But 4 Gs is pretty harsh. I've done parabolic flights, and I don't know if Kris has or not, but during the part where you're pulling up to go into the microgravity phase, you're pulling 2 Gs, and 2 Gs already feels like a lot. So pulling 4 would be really challenging. And then coming home, it's hard too, because on reentry on the Soyuz, the way our astronauts all return now, they're pulling 6 Gs nominally, and if they have a ballistic reentry, it can be up to 8 or over 8 Gs on reentry. So that's kind of tough right there, especially after being in space for 6 months and not used to having gravity or not feeling gravity at all. There is gravity in space, it's just that you're in free fall around the Earth. So microgravity has, as Kris was saying, has a big impact on humans. We need to put a lot more thought into how we're going to be more efficient with our environmental control and life support systems. So there's just a lot of work to do. A lot of work has been done on the ISS. I know there's been a lot of research, especially out of the Human Research Program out of JSC. We still have a lot to learn, and we still have a ways to go before we can really start talking about a sustained presence, off planet.
Yeah,
from an engineering standpoint.
From an engineering standpoint and a human factor standpoint, right? That's the beauty of this conversation, is you guys are kind of providing that holistic perspective on both ends, and there's challenges on the engineering side as well as the human side. Kris, in your kind of entrance into this discussion, you kind of called out some obvious, tension points or incongruities between kind of the current capabilities and approaches that we're having. But obviously there needs to be some changes if we're going to kind of accelerate and get to a place where we have sustained presence. Where do you think our design strategies need to go, particularly from a human perspective, human design perspective?
There's 2 ways to come at this problem, and one is kind of the incremental improvement approach, which is probably a big part of the work that I do at NASA, helping to design medical systems for space exploration. We're looking at how to best take terrestrial medical capabilities and translate those to the space environment. And so that work is very much focused on making small steps to improve our medical care in space. I think the larger part of your question is, what are the technological leaps or advancements that we could make that will truly enable humans to to prosper in space. And when you think about those, you really start to think about how we can minimize the impact of space on the human to provide them with a more conducive work environment or living environment. And I've been watching a lot of Star Trek lately during
Excellent.
the pandemic, and it's really made me think a little bit about what we're doing right now is trying to look at how we can take technologies and knowledge that we've gotten on the space station and expand those to the lunar vicinity, whether it's cislunar space or the lunar surface. But if you really think about Mars, we should be looking at technologies that are going to be really game changers. And so the kinds of technologies we're talking about there are advanced propulsion technology. So hearing about different types of propulsion that can get you to Mars in a fraction of the time that chemical propulsion can get you there, that goes a long way to protecting the human system, because part of the biggest risk of the human system in space is the sheer amount of time you have to spend in transit between here and Mars. Other things that go along with that are ways that we can either create Earth-like environments, which is through advanced eclipse systems or even simulated gravity. And then, of course, there comes into play the protection that we need. So different innovative radiation protection technologies. All of those types of things are going to enable people to live and work in the space environment for longer periods of time, which is what we really need to be able to do if we want to explore beyond the moon.
Great. How about from your perspective, Angie?
Yeah, I second everything that Kris just said. We've been, moving along, kind of developing capabilities in a traditional way, So right now, we clearly don't have what we need to sustain human presence off planet, like I said earlier. We're still working on just trying to get the large launch vehicles ready so that we can upload the mass that we need to upload. We need to advance technologies in environmental control and life support systems, obviously, because we're going to have that to sustain life. We need to think about how we're going to build structures when we think about if we just want to sustain presence on the lunar surface. What kind of structures do you need? Does it make sense to take advantage of the lunar regolith to provide some shielding from the radiation? I know there's a lot of ideas been put forward along those lines. And as Kris said, we really have to take into account the human factors. There are some companies, one example, SpaceX, who's doing things a little bit differently than our traditional systems engineering and integration process. But still, for the most part, we're doing things in a conventional way. And I think we need to think about how we can improve how we're doing things and make sure that we're taking into account those human factors and also the medical aspects, because what you can take with you will be very limited. So we're going to have to learn to use what's there and leverage, in situ resources that we can get our hands on and things like that. So, yeah. Lots of challenges yet.
Lots of challenges.
But we're up to it.
Absolutely. And I think there's, we're at this interesting cusp of maybe having a need for sustained presence again in space. And so hopefully the incentives are there. As you both were talking, it kind of dawned on me. It seems like a lot of the work thus far has been in that incremental improvement. But there are potential game-changing technologies that, as you mentioned, Kris, could, minimize the impact of humans in space while they get from destination A to B. We haven't really talked about humans themselves. Like, potentially changing, and modifying their DNA, for instance, where they can maybe get strengthened. And I know a lot of interesting thought pieces that have been put together over at, MIT Media Lab on this. Are there other, types of more disruptive approaches, that we might consider moving forward? And I ask this in the sense of, the history of human spaceflight has been primarily governmental. We are now kind of on the cusp of moving into, hopefully, right, everyday citizens being able to fly in space. And so how do you manage risk with that opportunity? And is our incremental change because we are really focused on the traditional approaches in thinking about the mission? And might that change if, let's say, the commercial sector takes it on and there's private citizens flying in space? I don't know who wants to answer that one first, but it's a tricky question. Angie, you want to give this one a try first?
Sure. And indeed, that is a challenging question. And I think if we can develop a market, for commercial space tourism or commercial astronauts or people, taking vacations into space, I think once there's a market established, you'll see a lot more change more quickly, because that's generally what it takes. If you think back to when aircraft started flying, not so many people flew, but that's a pretty classic example. Hopefully space flight might follow along those lines, but we are still waiting for some of those breakthrough transitional kinds of technologies to come along. And as far as the DNA thing goes, I'd have to leave that to Kris. That's not my strong area. But I do often ponder what humans would look like if we established a permanent base on Mars, for example. And we will reproduce. We'd have to sustain people. What will we start to look like? What will our structure be? Could a person born on Mars who grows up on Mars ever come back to Earth? Mm-hmm. If you grow up in 0.38 G your whole life, all of a sudden you're landing on Earth and you're in 1 G. Are you going to be able to handle that? I guess you could train for it. I can stand up in 2 Gs, but I wouldn't want to move around in 2 Gs for sure.
Right.
Kris,
and I mean, we've even seen, I was just going to add in, we've even seen, there are studies, right, that have shown, being in space even a short time changes your DNA, right? So absolutely, right? If you're born on a different planet, there's going to be changes and it's going to be difficult coming back. So yes, Kris, we'd love to weigh in on, what your perspective is here.
I think it's an interesting ethical dilemma. How much are we willing to accept people changing, and at what point are they different than when they left? And the interesting thing here is that right now, as things stand, NASA is prohibited by law from doing any kind of genetic testing on astronauts for a selection purpose. But it does not preclude necessarily us from being able to look at other options for how we can tailor the way we take care of people in space based upon their individual makeup. And so an example of this is what is commonly referred to on the ground as personalized medicine. So in a futuristic vision of what spaceflight could look like, there might be a time when we know the complete genetic makeup of future astronauts who are going on doing exploration missions. And those people may every morning wake up in their individual crew quarters, and they may look into a camera that takes a picture of their eye and the back of their eyeball. They would take a device out of the wall where they would be able to breathe into that device for a moment or for a minute, and it would take a number of measurements on their metabolism and their vital signs. They may be able to touch a sensor on the wall, and it takes a small blood sample, and that blood sample gets analyzed. And then that astronaut is given a prescription for their day. eat this many calories, this should be the type of food that you eat, do this type of exercise, go take this supplement, and you might need to take this medicine today for a medical problem. And this kind of futuristic vision of people taking care of themselves in space using all available data to them and personalizing their care based upon this information is something that is very much in the future from a space exploration perspective, but something that could allow us to use all of the information we have about the makeup of the individuals flying so we can personalize all of their care and all of their personal needs.
Wow, Kris, that was just amazing. I mean, I was almost picturing myself in that future as you were describing it. I think, we need to have many, many of those exercises to think about what are the possibilities. Kind of going into, Kris, I know you had mentioned that in some of our previous conversations that you feel like there could be more emphasis really at the interfaces. One of them being the interface between engineering and medicine, but also between operations and research. Can you maybe elaborate for the audience on kind of where this came from?
Absolutely. A number of years ago, when NASA was starting to try and really think about what was going to be necessary to take care of astronauts on exploration missions, NASA commissioned a study from the National Academy of Medicine. And at that time, what that study said was that the integration of the human system into the vehicle and mission system or mission construct was essential for enabling those people to be taken care of properly during exploration missions. And what that was really getting at is the need for medicine to be able to speak the language of engineering and vice versa. And so some of the work that we do at NASA is focused on building a bridge between the engineering community and the medical community. And so I'm going to give you two examples, which are ones that I frequently use, but I think they illustrate the point well. So when you think about the medicine side not being able to communicate effectively, a number of years ago, before the International Space Station was its current concept, there was something called Space Station Freedom, which was going to be a US space station. And Space Station Freedom was supposed to have an entire module dedicated to medical care and life sciences research. And part of that module was going to be a hyperbaric chamber, which is a pressurized chamber in which you can treat people if they get decompression sickness during a spacewalk. So as a scuba diver, you learn all about decompression sickness. It's called the bends, but you can also get it in space. And so the theoretical risk was that astronauts doing a lot of spacewalks to build the space station could get the bends and would need a hyperbaric chamber. And when the time came for the engineers to actually look at incorporating that into their designs for the space station, they said, well, how many cases of this have you had? And the doctors said, none. And the engineers said, I can't give you an entire chamber to treat something that's never happened in space because it's a theoretical risk. I don't have the mass or volume to do that. And the doctors were unable to express to the engineers the risk of the problem in terms that the engineers could understand so that they could then design the right kind of system to control for those medical risks. The flip side of that is the classic story of Sally Ride being asked how many tampons she was going to need to go to space because the engineers had predicted that she was going to need about 100 to go to space for her first mission. And that's clearly too many for a short space shuttle mission to space, but the engineers had no concept of what the human system needs were because they hadn't communicated effectively with the people on the human system side. So both sides, I believe, are equally responsible for this disconnect. And our job right now at NASA with the group that I work with, Exploration Medical Capability, is helping to correct that problem. So we are trying to understand medical needs, medical risks and capabilities, and expressing those appropriately in requirements language so that engineers can design and build the system that best controls human system risk.
Wow, those are fascinating examples. And as a woman working in space, I find that funny, but not funny.
And I can second what Kris was saying. When I was in graduate school, I was doing a double major in biomedical engineering and electrical engineering. And one of the things we were trying to do is to design a closed loop drug delivery system to regulate blood pressure. And I can tell you that going in and talking to the physicians and explaining to them what we wanted to do, and then trying to understand what they were telling us, was really challenging. We got through it and everything, but I understand what Kris is saying. And you see that in all sorts of ways, where engineers, they think they have this great solution. And I saw it working in DoD programs, and they never go talk to the user, or sometimes they don't go talk to the user. But, getting the user in the loop early on can pay high benefits down the road. And Kris, I applaud what you guys are doing in HRP, trying to pull those two groups together so that they can communicate better. That's important.
Yeah, these are really interesting kind of pragmatic snapshots about all the work that really needs to get done immediately, right, in the near term, and really lay that foundation. I'd like to take a moment and kind of go and explore maybe some farther out perspectives. So, Angie, I think I'm going to start with you on this one, just because of the breadth of experiences that you've had in your career. What do you think the future of human exploration might look like or mean for organizations such as NASA, the Space Force, the private sector, or the everyday person?
Okay. Well, human exploration in terms of, government agencies is the mandate of NASA. I just listened to a briefing, and I can't remember the gentleman's name, anyway, on the Space Force, and he stated quite clearly and adamantly that it is not in the Space Force's remit to do human space flight or human exploration. That belongs to NASA. Now, in terms of the private sector, it's already been announced that in the effort that NASA is undertaking to commercialize LEO, they've already let a contract for a private company, I think it's Axiom, to build a module that will be added to the space station. And they've already booked private astronauts, commercial astronauts, to come up there. So I would say on the commercial side, we just have to wait and see what the market looks like, see if there's a group of, I'd say very extreme adventure tourists that want to do this sort of thing and have the resources to do it. The future could be, it's so hard to say what could or might not happen. So many things could happen between now and then. But, if this thing really takes off on the commercial side, we could see a lot more commercial exploration for profit to, harvest resources on the lunar surface or an asteroid or wherever. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's the beauty of my job, right? Is that there's many, many possibilities, and we're not in the business of predicting, but we are trying to imagine and, of course, accelerate, some of these exciting new opportunities to maximize space for everybody. One of the threads that, as you were speaking, Angie, that I was thinking about is that I know that there are pharmaceutical companies who are actively engaging in different experiments on platforms in LEO. Kris, do you have any insights into, just space for the use of medicine and medical research and how that might propagate in the future?
The experiments you're describing are really looking at trying to identify novel techniques or technologies that can maximize the use of the microgravity environment to improve the functioning of those pharmaceuticals. And so that is one particular aspect of utilizing the unique nature of space to advance medical care. The other side of it, to the beginning part of your question about the commercial aspects and the commercial sector, is that that's also going to open up an interesting area of medicine that NASA has never really looked at before, which is how do you take care of quote unquote normal people in space? The NASA astronaut corps is extremely highly selected, and they are very extensively medically screened. And so the default answer for people to fly into space from a NASA perspective is no to most people and yes to a very select few. Whereas the commercial aspect of human spaceflight is going to be, we want to say yes to everyone who can pay money to go, and we want to say no to as few people as possible. So how can we find ways to fly people with more money than health? And all of NASA's risk prediction models, all of NASA's work on medical capabilities are designed around our astronaut population, which is extremely healthy. And so the extrapolation of NASA's work to a commercial sector that incorporates a lot of people who are otherwise not necessarily as healthy as a NASA astronaut means that we have to then plan for all types of different medical contingencies when those folks fly. And so the more people that we have exposure to in the spaceflight environment who look more like the normal population of Earth will allow us to expand our knowledge and capabilities from a medical care perspective that to date have been extremely constrained by we've only done what we needed to do. And so expanding the envelope of what we can do will be based upon who flies and when they fly.
Yeah, that is really fascinating. Oh, go ahead, Angie. Did you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment. Back 20 years ago, in the year 2000, at International Space University, we had a team project on space tourism. And we, this whole question of medical fitness came up. And there was a lot of heated conversation. We had some flight docs who came and talked to the group. We had engineers and all that. And we were just trying to lay out what would be the minimum health requirements. And we couldn't even agree as a team on that because, if a rock and roll band pays big money just to take a suborbital flight, and they show up and they're clearly not fit, they're smoking, or maybe they've been drinking, are they going to say, no, we're not going to take your money? They will have already taken their money. So, you got all sorts of things. And Kris made an excellent point with regard to the health of the population of current NASA astronauts and, astronauts in general. They're very healthy people. And, the folks that have a lot of money might not be the healthiest people, around. Maybe you can encourage them to make some improvements by, dangling a space flight out there.
So if we're going to have Disney World, on the moon or Mars, we really got to think this through a bit more.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so putting on your visioning hat, I'm going to start with you, Kris, and then ask Angie the same question. From your perspective, what are just give an example of maybe a preferred and unpreferred future regarding the future of space exploration and humans in space? And it can be any time increment. It can be relatively near future or farther future.
So I talked before about kind of more pie in the sky kind of stuff from a Star Trek perspective. So in this circumstance, I'll stay a little more near term. While I love the idea of really innovative or disruptive technologies, the reality is that as we go out into the solar system, each step we take is going to be, in most cases, an incremental step. And the vision that I have for human sustainable exploration of space is based upon one that people are used to every day, and that is exercise. If you decide to go from your couch to running a marathon, and you think you're going to be successful running a marathon tomorrow, you are sorely mistaken. And so what we have to do is we have to train ourselves to live and work in space. We have been doing that on the space station. We have been extremely successful with it on the space station. Now we have to start pushing further out. And so the moon is absolutely the most logical next training location for us to live and work. And so to Angie's point about being on the lunar surface and learning how to use the resources and how to build structures, that's very important. Being in cislunar space and being able to expose ourselves and our spacecraft to the deep space environment for months, if not years on end, and see how the people change and how the spacecraft and its systems change in that environment is incredibly important. But further to that, what we also have to do is we also have to learn how to break our reliance on Earth. And so when NASA talks about this, we talk about progressive Earth independence. And right now on the space station, we have 24/7 real-time communications with the ground. And every minute of every day, the ground can ask the crew something, or the crew can ask the ground something. And there isn't autonomy in the space environment. And in order to be able to properly explore not only cislunar space and the moon itself, but also to go onto Mars, we have to be able to be independent of the ground. We have to be able to know that our spacecraft is going to work the way we want it to work. We have to know that the people can take care of themselves without having to ask the ground how to do it. And we have to practice that and train for it. And the way that we do that is by using the resources at our disposal, which right now is the moon and cislunar space. So learning how to be independent and autonomous from the Earth is essential for our future exploration. And without that, I don't think we're going very far.
So I'm assuming your unpreferred future is if we're not involving any sorts of training and we just go and, either let the commercial sector throw some people up there. Maybe we have a couple bad accidents, or, we take a slow and steady approach like we've been doing, but we aren't including a broader population. Angie, over to you. What's your preferred future?
Well, like you, I tend to think about when you're thinking about futures, I'm also a student of Jim Dater, so I think about the 4 futures and take some inspiration from the paper that you shared the other day. But I would like to think that we won't stick to the status quo. I have a feeling that's what we're going to do, like Kris said, is incremental steps. Mm-hmm. I fully concur that we're going to have to become more independent of Earth, because one of the major problems, and I think Kris, HRP is looking a lot into this, is how do you adapt to isolation? And that's a very apropos topic right now. And there are, 4 distinct phases of adapting to isolation. We won't go into that now, but that's from a psychology standpoint. But I think, if we might, get to a point where we can sustain a presence on the moon, we get used to living and working in space, and then maybe, go on from there. I think some of the timelines that have been put out there are a little optimistic. Okay. Just knowing the technology that's required to do some of these things, especially on the human side of it. My most unpreferred future is that we run into political hurdles that are insurmountable, and the political will is just not there to sustain NASA or whoever, and we would have to depend on there being being able to wrap a business case around commercial exploration. My preferred future would be that transformational thing, where we have a breakthrough, some kind of, breakthrough in propulsion. I mean, we are looking at nuclear thermal propulsion, but we're a ways away from having that sort of thing too. Lots of work, but at least we're thinking in that direction, which I find very, very, very refreshing, But that would be my preferred future. But I just fear that, I've seen this come and go. We're going to the moon. No, we're not. We're going to the moon. No, we're not. It's like Charlie Brown in the football.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It makes it very difficult when your target keeps moving, and then you have to reset every couple of years, and it takes decades,
every 4
right?
to 8 years. Every 4
Yes.
to 8 years, something changes. So it's difficult to work in those circumstances, but we do what we can.
And I am just so proud of you, Angie, for using the 4 future state. You are a great future student. That's exactly what we should be doing. We should be thinking about the different trajectories and possibilities, looking at where we're, most likely headed, but also where we think we want to go, and try to move the needle more towards that direction, and also identify where we absolutely don't want to go. And I think, given we haven't really talked about COVID too much, that's one of the reasons we're on this call and not doing it in person, right?
Right.
Is the impact that COVID is going to have potentially on our human spaceflight programs, immediately, but also kind of longer term. And there's a couple of key indicators I see coming up, which is, obviously, an election, as well as, potential budget cuts that might have to come just as a result of all of the economic turmoil caused by the pandemic. And so it's definitely something for our audiences to kind of think about. So I think, kind of given that, that comment, my last question for you guys is, what is the right next steps? And you kind of have hit on this a little bit, towards having a sustainable human presence, but also, why is it important? And Kris, I'm going to start with you and then let Angie wrap up for us.
I would say that I think that the most important reason why we do this is because it is something which is hardwired into us as humans. And so every environment on Earth, we have found a way to take advantage of that environment and to live in that environment and thrive there. And space is another logical environment for us to explore and to evolve into. And I think that even right now, in our current circumstance, we are seeing a situation in which people are living through difficult times, and there's a lot of potential strife ahead of us. And having something to look to as an inspiration is extremely important for people. The other part of it, I would say, is that there are technologies being developed as a result of our desire to expand our human presence in space, many of which that have already had incredible benefits for the ground. And the ability to predict which of those technologies is going to be the one that is the most successful on the ground is really difficult to know. And some of the most important ones we have were not necessarily meant for ground use. They were developed for space use. And someone saw it and said, I can use that. And they developed it and modified it in a way that was innovative and interesting, that had not been part of the original design characteristics of that solution. So a simple example there is the telemetry that was used to record the astronauts' vital signs during the Apollo missions. That's the technology that is in every single monitor in every single hospital on the entire face of the Earth. And so the ability to create new technologies, to expand our boundaries, and to use those technologies in innovative ways is an inherent human function. And I think that space exploration enables that capability.
No. Angie?
Yeah, I agree with Kris. I think that it's just part of who we are to explore. I think it's really important that we do that. I understand that there's realities. I think we should, under the circumstances right now, be happy with incremental gains, and hope for that breakthrough that's going to come, understanding that there will be challenges, and a lot of those challenges are going to come directly from this pandemic that we're living through right now. But I think, NASA has plans for the future. It's based on, boots on the moon 2024. Maybe we get there, and if we do, that's awesome, and we can build on that. But I think the points Kris has made on, some of the technology, people go, well, what are you guys doing? And they take for granted that, a lot of the things that have come out of the space program, not just the exploration program, but just space in general, we take for granted satellite television. We take for granted GPS. We take for granted a lot of things, especially in hospitals and things that have been derived from the space program. And I know for a fact that a lot of the neuroscience research that's been done both on the shuttle and on the International Space Station has translated directly into clinical applications that have helped stroke patients and other patients with balance disorders. So, you can point to a lot of good. I think it's important that we continue our quest to realize a permanent presence, or at least a long-lasting presence on the moon's surface, and get to Mars at some point. I think we will. Unfortunately, I don't think I'll see that, but who knows? Maybe we'll get that breakthrough technology.
You just never know. You just never
You
know.
don't, things have happened so fast. I mean, look what we're doing right now. 10 years ago, we wouldn't be doing this,
Absolutely.
So it's, you just can't say. So what do you think?
Well, oh goodness. Well, that's a great segue into, my team has been doing a lot of thinking about a lot of different issues on the future of space, and also the global environment and dynamics writ large. And we've been thinking about them very much from a dynamic place, like the four futures, rather than just kind of a stagnant projection about where things are going, kind of given current context. And so part of our work is going to be incorporated into something called a futures map, where we've identified 7 core themes, and one of them is actually exploration. And so I think a lot of the things that we've talked about here in terms of regenerative medicine and psychology check-ins and AI as a psychology to help with isolation, we've hit on some of those themes, and I'm really excited for you guys to check this out when we debut it here in a couple of months, and look at, look and reflect on the conversation that we've had here, and then on this futures map, which is more kind of in the extreme art of the possible, but then work through this very pragmatic set of advice that I think you guys have given. I mean, you really have kind of condensed this hard problem into very, I think, pragmatic bites that we can work today, and really given, I think, the audience a lot of food for thought. I mean, there's some incredibly important work that we can be doing right now. We know what the problems are, so let's go do that. I just want to say thank you. Thank you for this conversation. It's been fascinating. I think this is going to be one of many on this series. It's a very, very important topic. So thank you to Kris. Thank you to Angie for being our guest today. And I hope you guys are all safe and well at home. And I'm going to give it over to Rebecca to give us some closing thoughts.
Great. Thanks so much, Kara. Yes, I echo what you said. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was really an interesting episode. Kris, I do have a question for you. So I'm also a scuba diver, and I want to know, what is your next dive once we're out of quarantine?
I was supposed to go to Bonaire last week.
Bon Air was great.
Yeah, I got canceled. So I don't know where the next one's going to be. I'm excited. I'm thinking about maybe some cage dives with some great white sharks.
Ooh!
Oh, wow. That sounds incredible. Hopefully my next trip will be to the Grand Caymans in October, but we'll see where we're at then. So yeah, I love scuba diving. I don't know if any of our viewers are into scuba diving, but Bonaire is a great place. I just dove Roatan, the green outhouse wall. I don't know if you've been there. Beautiful, saw a giant sea turtle. So definitely looking forward to getting back to diving after this, and looking forward to having you all back to talk about the human space flight aspect. It is very interesting. So just a reminder, we are here every Tuesday and Thursday. So we look forward to seeing you again next week. Thanks for tuning in. You can find us at aerospace.org/policy. Thanks to our guests today. And until next time.